They called her just a housewife. In the glittering world of her husband, Marcus Pierce, Elara was the invisible woman, the one who organized charity bake sales while he closed million-dollar deals. She was the simple, plain wife he tucked away the embarrassing secret to his sophisticated life. But at the Starlight Ball, the most exclusive event of the year, everyone was about to learn the truth. The woman they dismissed was richer than all of them combined. The man she loved was about to lose everything. This is the story of how Elara Pierce burned their world to the ground. The scent of old money and fresh-cut lilies always made Elara Pierce feel slightly nauseous. Her home, a sprawling, sterile white mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, was a testament to her husband's ambition, not her own. Every gleaming surface, every piece of cold modern art had been chosen by Marcus. Elara's only domain was the kitchen, which she genuinely loved, and her small, sun-filled study where she organized fundraisers for the local women's shelter. "Elara, are you even listening?" Marcus barked, not looking up from his phone. He was knotting a silk Tom Ford tie, his reflection staring back at him from the black marble of the fireplace. Elara flinched, pulling her focus from a spreadsheet detailing silent auction bids. "Sorry, Marcus. The shelter gala is next week. I was just finalizing the numbers." Marcus sighed, a sound of profound theatrical exasperation. "The shelter gala. Right. Listen, Elara, I need you to be serious for one night. The Starlight Ball is in 2 weeks. It's not your little bake sale. This is the event." "I know, Marcus. The one hosted by the Ashfords," she said quietly. "Not just hosted by them. Julian Ashford himself is rumored to be making an appearance. Do you understand what that means?" He finally turned to her, his eyes cold. At 42, Marcus Pierce was a man sculpted by ambition. He was a senior vice president at Crestview Investments, a firm that was, to put it mildly, drowning. "It's important for your deal," Elara recited. "It's not a deal, Elara. It's the deal. Ashford Global is considering an acquisition of Crestview. Without it—" He didn't need to finish. Without it, the house of cards. This house, the cars, his reputation would collapse. "I need you to look presentable, not like a librarian. I need you to look like you belong." "I don't belong," she thought. She hadn't belonged in this world for 10 years. She had been Elara Pierce for a decade. But before that, she had been someone else entirely. A ghost. I'll find something to wear," she murmured. "Good." He tapped his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. "I've got to go. A dinner meeting with Serafina and the junior partners. We're finalizing the pitch for the Ashford board." Elara's stomach tightened at the name, Serafina Vance, the new, brilliant, and stunningly beautiful junior executive in Marcus's division, the woman whose perfume, a heavy, expensive musk, had clung to his suit jackets for the past 6 months. "Oh. Well, have a good time." Elara said the words, tasting like ash. "Don't wait up." He was already out the door, the click of the lock echoing in the cavernous hallway. Elara was left alone with the lilies and the spreadsheets. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the entryway. She saw a woman of 32, with kind eyes, simple brown hair, pulled back in a clip, and a plain cardigan. She saw just a housewife. But as she stared, another face stared back. A memory of a girl with fire in her eyes, standing on the deck of a yacht off the coast of Monaco. A girl who had been told she would one day rule the world. She shook the memory away. That girl was gone. That girl had run away to be normal, to be loved for herself. She had met Marcus, a charming, driven associate at a small firm. She had fallen in love with his energy, his promises of a simple, successful life. She had chosen this. She went back to her spreadsheets. The women's shelter needed $50,000 for a new wing. She would get it for them. This at least was real. This was her work. Later that night, long after midnight, Marcus's phone, synced to the tablet in the kitchen, buzzed with a new message. Elara, cleaning a wine glass, glanced over. Serafina. He's bought it. The pitch is solid. He has no idea the Ashfords are planning to liquidate Crestview, not acquire it. He's just desperate enough to sign anything. And his pathetic little wife. He actually called her domestic. God, you're a good actor, Marcus. Elara dropped the glass. It didn't just break. It shattered, exploding across the quartz countertop. It wasn't the affair. She had suspected that. For months. It was the lie. It was the contempt. Pathetic little wife. Domestic. And liquidate. Marcus wasn't trying to save his company. He was trying to secure a golden parachute for himself, selling his partners and his wife down the river for a payout from the Ashford deal. She stared at the shattered glass, and for the first time in 10 years, the face of the girl on the yacht didn't fade away. It smiled, a cold, sharp, dangerous smile. The following week was a blur of forced smiles. Elara played the part of the supportive, oblivious wife. She cleaned the shattered glass, bandaged the small cut on her hand, and said nothing. She watched Marcus practice his pitch, a performance of desperation masquerading as confidence. He was a man acting out the final scene of his own tragedy, and he didn't even know it. The official invitation for the Starlight Ball arrived. It was not paper. It was a half-inch thick slab of engraved acrylic, delivered by a courier. The Ashford family crest, a golden griffin clutching a key, was embossed at the top. "Look at this, Elara," Marcus said, holding it up to the light. "This is it, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the entire Egyptian wing. They say the Ashfords donate 8 figures just to close the museum for the night." "It's impressive," Elara said, her voice carefully neutral. She knew the crest. As a child, she'd had a signet ring with the same griffin. She'd thrown it into the Seine the day she ran away. "Impressive isn't the word," Marcus scoffed. "It's power, and I need you to look the part. I mean it, Elara." He pulled a black credit card from his wallet. Not his usual one, but a sleek, heavy card with no name, only a number. "This is the corporate emergency card. Go to Bergdorf's. Go to Saks. I don't care. Buy a dress. Buy jewelry. Just, for God's sake, get your hair done. Don't look like you're going to a PTA meeting." The insult, which would have stung her a week ago, now felt clinical. She took the card. "All right, Marcus. I'll take care of it." "Good. Serafina is helping me with the final presentation. She actually knows some of the junior board members. She knows how this world works. She knows how you work," Elara thought. The next day, Elara went into Manhattan. But she didn't go to Bergdorf's. She walked down Fifth Avenue, feeling the city's energy, a current she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a decade. She passed the grand fortress-like building that was the U.S. headquarters of Ashford Global. A massive, polished brass A hung over the granite archway. She paused, looking at her faint reflection in the brass. She didn't go inside. Not yet. Instead, she went to a small, unassuming coffee shop in the West Village, one she used to frequent. She ordered a black coffee and sat. She was waiting. Meanwhile, in a glass-walled conference room in Midtown, Serafina. Vance was lounging on Marcus's desk, one Louboutin heel swinging lazily. She actually took the credit card. Serafina laughed, a sound like ice cubes in a glass. God, she's so predictable. What do you think she'll buy? Something beige, I bet. Something with a sensible neckline. It doesn't matter, Marcus said, massaging his temples, as long as she doesn't embarrass me in front of the Ashfords. Oh, sweetie, she's going to embarrass you. Serafina purred, sliding off the desk, and walking behind him, her hands kneading his shoulders. But that's the point, isn't it? When you finally leave her after your big payday, everyone will understand. They'll say, well, look at her. Can you blame him? The deal first, Sarah. Then we can talk about that. The deal, Serafina agreed. I've double-checked the liquidation clauses. The moment Julian Ashford's representative signs the holding company, transfers the funds to your private account in Zurich. Crestview's other partners will be locked in a bankruptcy proceeding for years. But you'll be on a beach with me. And what about old man Ashford? You're sure he won't be there? You're sure it's just his lawyers? Julian Ashford hasn't been seen in public in 5 years, Marcus. He's a recluse, a ghost. He's probably hooked up to a machine somewhere. His lackeys run everything. And those lackeys, my darling, are very, very predictable. Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes as Serafina's fingers brushed his neck. Good, because in 1 week I'll be free. Across town, Elara's phone vibrated. A text message with a single word, here. Elara stood up, leaving her coffee untouched. She walked out of the shop and into a black Rolls-Royce that had pulled silently to the curb. The door was opened by a man in a dark suit. It's good to see you, Miss Elara, the man said, his voice thick with a quiet, respectful relief. It's good to see you too, Benjamin, she said. The man was Benjamin Reed, chief counsel for the Ashford family, and the one person on earth who knew her as anything other than Mrs. Pierce. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was silent, the chaos of New York City reduced to a muted film outside the tinted windows. It smelled of old leather and his grandfather's faint, familiar scent of cedar. How is he? Elara asked, her voice tight. It was the first question she had asked in 10 years. Benjamin Reed, a man whose face was a road map of loyalty and concern, turned to her. He is fading, Miss Elara. The doctors say it is a matter of months, perhaps only weeks. He has one last wish. To see me, Elara whispered, looking down at her hands. Hands that baked bread and weeded gardens, not hands that signed billion-dollar contracts. To make you safe, Benjamin corrected gently. To restore what is yours. He has never stopped searching for you, not for one day. When you vanished from Paris, he nearly tore the world apart. I know, she said, guilt and old anger mixing into a bitter cocktail. I couldn't breathe, Ben. The expectations, the Ashford name. It was a golden cage. The arranged marriage he was planning. I would have rather died. He knows that now, Ben said. He's an old man, Elara. He's not the tyrant you fled. He's just a grandfather who wants to know his only heir is safe before he goes. Elara processed this. How did you find me? We've had leads for years. We knew you were in the US, but you were clever. New name, no credit cash jobs for the first few years. And then you married Marcus Pierce. Ben's face darkened. We've been monitoring him for 6 months, ever since his firm Crestview opened negotiations for the Ashford Global acquisition. Elara's blood ran cold. You knew he was trying to make this deal. Yes, we were perplexed. He was negotiating against your interests, using his marriage to you, which he clearly doesn't understand, as a minor social leverage point. But then 6 weeks ago, the nature of the deal changed. He began colluding with Miss Serafina Vance. He's not being acquired, is he? Elara asked, her voice flat. No, Miss Elara. Ben said, his tone grave. He is being played. Ms. Vance is colluding with a rival firm, Vanguard Capital. They convinced her that Ashford Global intended to liquidate Crestview. They've fed her false information. She in turn believes she is helping Marcus steal a golden parachute. So what's the real deal? There isn't one. Ashford Global was never going to acquire Crestview. The firm is leveraged to the point of absurdity. Your grandfather merely allowed the negotiations to continue, to keep an eye on Mr. Pierce, to see what kind of man his granddaughter had married. Elara leaned her head against the cool glass. And now he knows? He does, Ben said, and he is displeased. The car wasn't heading back to Greenwich. It was heading toward a private airfield in Teterboro, New Jersey. Where are we going? To see your grandfather. He is at the estate in the Adirondacks. He wants to see you before the ball. Ben paused. Elara, the Starlight Ball is not just a party this year. It is your introduction. Your grandfather plans to formally announce his retirement and name you as his successor, as the matriarch and CEO of Ashford Global. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. CEO. Matriarch. These were the words she had fled. I can't, Ben. I'm a housewife. I organize bake sales. I haven't looked at a balance sheet in a decade. Benjamin Reed smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen. Miss Elara, you were educated at MIT and INSEAD. You speak 4 languages. You interned at the Rothschild Bank in Zurich. You single-handedly restructured your boarding school's endowment fund at the age of 17. The only reason you are a housewife is because you are brilliant enough to act like one. Your grandfather knows this. I know this. The only person you've managed to fool, it seems, is your husband. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a simple, elegant file. This is the dossier on Marcus Pierce, and Ms. Vance, and Vanguard Capital. Everything. Your grandfather believed. You might want to read it, to understand the game before you play your hand. Elara opened the file. The first page was a wire transfer confirmation, from Marcus's account to a private account in Serafina's name. The second was a transcript of the phone call from last night. She read. And as she read, the housewife, Elara Pierce, the woman who worried about PTA meetings and beige dresses, quietly and completely evaporated. The woman who was left. She was an Ashford, and she was furious. The Ashford estate in the Adirondacks was not a house. It was a territory. A sprawling, Gilded Age great camp, built of massive timbers and local stone. It sat on its own private lake, surrounded by tens of thousands of acres of pristine forest. The camp was named Griffin's Ledge. It was where Elara had spent her summers as a child, before her parents' death in a plane crash had made her the sole heir. The helicopter landed on a wide granite pad. Benjamin Reed escorted her to the main lodge. Julian Ashford was waiting for her on the porch, wrapped in a blanket in a large wheelchair, an oxygen tube clipped discreetly to his nose. He was thinner than she remembered his legendary steel-grey eyes, now clouded with age and illness. But when he saw her, they cleared. Elara. He breathed, his voice a dry rustle. He held out a trembling hand. Elara rushed to him, dropping to her knees and taking his frail hand in hers. The tears she had held back for a week, for a decade, finally came. "Grandfather, I'm so sorry." "Hush, child," he whispered, his other hand coming up to cup her face. "It is I who am sorry. I drove you away. I saw you as a successor, not as a granddaughter. I tried to forge you into a weapon. I forgot to just love you. Can you forgive an old fool? There's nothing to forgive." She wept. "I was just so lost." "You were not lost," he said, his voice gaining a flicker of its old strength. "You were in hiding. Now, it is time to come home." They sat for hours. She told him about her small life, about the joy she found in the shelter, in gardening, in living without a security detail. He in turn told her about the company, how it had grown, but how it lacked heart. "It is a vast, powerful machine, Elara," he said, looking out at the lake. "But it has no soul. It needs you. The Ashford Foundation. Your mother started it. It's been stagnant. You with your shelter. You understand things I never did." Then they talked about Marcus. "He's a fool," Julian stated, his voice flat. "A greedy, short-sighted, arrogant fool. And he has my granddaughter's name in his mouth. He doesn't know grandfather. He thinks I'm nobody. He calls me just a housewife." Julian Ashford's eyes hardened. "That is a mistake he will only make once. Benjamin has explained the situation. The ball. The announcement. Are you ready for this, Elara? Once you step into that light, you can never go back to the shadows." Elara thought of the text message from Serafina. She thought of Marcus's contempt. She thought of the lie. "He's not just a fool, grandfather," Elara said, her voice turning cold. "He's a thief. He's colluding with Serafina Vance to defraud his own company and escape with a payout. And she is colluding with Vanguard Capital to sabotage the Ashford name." Julian nodded slowly. "A tangled web." "I'm not just going to announce my succession," Elara said, standing up. "I'm going to clean house. My house, my company's house, and my husband's." A slow, wolfish grin spread across Julian Ashford's face. "There you are," he whispered. "There's the Ashford blood." "Ben," Elara called, turning to the lawyer who stood discreetly by the door. "I need you to do several things. First, I want you to freeze the Zurich account Marcus Pierce opened. Use our Swiss banking connections. I want it frozen 1 hour before the Starlight Ball begins." Ben nodded, already taking notes. "Second, I want you to call the SEC and prepare a whistleblower report on Vanguard Capital for stock manipulation using Ms. Vance as an unregistered agent. Time the submission for 900 p.m., the night of the ball. Consider it done. Third, I need a dress." Ben looked up confused. "A dress, Miss Elara?" "Marcus gave me his corporate card to buy a dress at Bergdorf's," she said, a wicked glint in her eye. "I want to use it. I want to buy the most obscenely expensive, garish, awful dress they have. Something beige and sensible." Ben looked utterly bewildered, but Julian Ashford burst into a rare, rumbling laugh. "And," Elara continued, "I want my dress, the one Mother commissioned for my 21st birthday, the Dior gown. Is it still in the vault?" "Of course, miss," Ben said. "Have it flown to New York, and call my mother's team, the stylist, the hair, the makeup, and Harry Winston. Tell them the Griffin is returning." Elara spent 2 more days with her grandfather, poring over the company's financials, absorbing the last 10 years of business. It was like a dormant language she suddenly remembered how to speak. She wasn't just a housewife. She was a genius. And she had been bored for a very, very long time. When she returned to the sterile Greenwich house, Marcus was there fuming. "Where the hell have you been?" he yelled. "I've been calling you for 2 days." Elara walked past him, carrying a large, obnoxious Bergdorf Goodman bag. "I was at a spa," she said calmly. "You told me to get presentable. I got presentable. A 2-day spa trip. Without telling me the ball is tomorrow night." "Elara, I'm aware." She pulled the dress from the bag and held it up. It was a monstrosity. A high-necked, long-sleeved, shapeless sack of a dress in the most depressing shade of beige. Marcus stared at it in horror. "What is that?" "It's Chanel," she lied. "The saleswoman said it was very sophisticated. It cost $20,000. Marcus's eye twitched, but he'd seen the charge on his corporate card. 20,000. For that, it's fine. Whatever. Just do something with your hair. Please, I'll see you tomorrow. I'm staying in the city tonight with Serafina to do final prep." "Of course, dear," Elara said, her smile perfectly sweet. "You go focus on your deal. I'll just see you at the museum." He slammed the door. "What?" Elara looked at the beige dress, then tossed it into the fireplace. "It's not even Chanel," she muttered. She hadn't even gone to the store. She'd had Ben's assistant buy it. The real dress was already hanging in her closet. The day of the Starlight Ball was electric. New York City hummed with the anticipation of it. The New York Times and Vogue had both run features on the event, calling it the coronation of the year, though no one understood why. The rumor was that Ashford Global was announcing a new massive philanthropic initiative. In a suite at the Pierre Hotel, Marcus Pierce was adjusting his tuxedo. Serafina Vance, in a crimson backless gown, was sipping champagne. "Tonight's the night," she toasted, clinking his glass. "By midnight you'll be a very rich man, and I'll be the woman who made it happen." "To us," Marcus said, his nerves fraying. "You're sure the transfer will go through? The moment the Ashford representative signs the acquisition papers, the liquidation clause is triggered. The funds route through 3 shell corporations and land in Zurich. By the time the SEC even smells a rat, we'll be in Turks and Caicos." "What about Elara?" Marcus asked, a flicker of something. Not guilt, but annoyance. "What about her?" Serafina scoffed. "She'll be humiliated, broke and divorced. She'll go back to whatever suburban hole she crawled out of. She'll be fine. She's a housewife, Marcus. They're resilient." Marcus nodded, straightening his bow tie. "You're right. She'll be fine." He looked at his watch, 6:00 p.m. "The car is here. Let's go make our entrance." Across town, in a different kind of silence, Elara was undergoing her own transformation. The house in Greenwich was empty, save for a team of people who moved with quiet, practiced efficiency. This was the Ashford team, the people who had served her mother. Her hair, once a simple brown, was now a rich, deep chestnut, styled in elegant, powerful waves that fell over one shoulder. Her makeup was flawless, not heavy, but definitive. Her eyes, once soft and kind, were now sharp and assessing, lined in a subtle black. She was not the woman who had left this house. Then she put on the dress. It was not a dress. It was armor. A custom Christian Dior gown commissioned a decade ago and held in storage, it was timeless. It was made of a deep sapphire blue velvet that seemed to drink the light. It was cut with an aristocratic severity, long sleeves, a high collar. but it was fitted perfectly to her body, hinting at a strength Marcus had never bothered to see. And then the jewelry. From a Harry Winston velvet case, Benjamin Reed lifted the Ashford necklace, a staggering river-like cascade of blue and white diamonds, culminating in the griffin's heart, a flawless 100-carat blue diamond. "Your mother wore this," Ben said quietly. Elara nodded, her throat tight. She fastened the matching diamond earrings. She was no longer Elara Pierce. She was Elara Ashford. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from the private security team Ben had assigned to her. "Security Mr. Pierce and Miss Vance have arrived at the Met. They are on the main floor." Elara stood. "It's time." "One more thing, miss," Ben said. He held out a small, velvet-lined box. Inside was the signet ring she had thrown into the Seine. The gold griffin. "How? Your grandfather had divers search for it for 6 months. He always knew you'd come back." Elara slid the ring onto her right pinky finger. It was a perfect fit. "Let's go," she said. Back at the museum, Marcus and Serafina were working the room. The Egyptian wing of the Met was breathtaking, the Temple of Dendur, serving as a backdrop. Waiters offered champagne and caviar. "There," Marcus whispered, nodding toward a group of men in severe suits. "That's the Ashford board. That's it, Sarah. That's our target." "Easy, darling," Serafina said, smoothing his lapel. "Let them come to us. We're the hot new commodity." As they mingled, a few of Marcus's colleagues from Crestview approached, their faces pale with worry. "Marcus," one of them, a man named David, said nervously, "my accounts are frozen. All of them. My corporate and my personal. Is something wrong with the firm?" Marcus felt a jolt of panic. "What, no? It's probably just a security glitch. The network gets jumpy before a big merger. But relax, David." Serafina cut in her smile, dazzlingly fake. "Have some champagne. Tonight is a celebration." Just then, Marcus's phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He looked at it. A fraud alert from his bank in Zurich. "Account frozen. Pending international inquiry." "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." "Marcus, what is it?" Serafina said, her smile faltering. "The account. It's frozen. They froze the account." "What?" Serafina's face went white. "They can't." How did they know? I don't know." "You," she hissed, grabbing his arm. "You did something stupid. You told someone. Did you tell your wife?" "What, no?" "She's too stupid to even understand. A Zurich account. Then who?" As panic began to grip them, a sudden, profound hush fell over the 3,000-strong crowd. The music stopped. The ambient chatter died. All eyes turned to the grand staircase. The silence in the great hall was absolute. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum, as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Marcus and Serafina, frozen in their private spiral of panic, turned with the rest of the crowd to see what had caused the interruption. On the landing of the grand staircase stood Julian Ashford. This alone was enough to cause a sensation. The man was a myth, a ghost. He hadn't been seen in public since the 2008 financial crisis. He was standing, albeit leaning heavily on a cane, not in the wheelchair they'd all assumed he was confined to. He looked frail, but his eyes, magnified by his glasses, swept the room with an ancient, undeniable authority. Beside him stood Benjamin Reed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian's voice boomed surprisingly strong, amplified by the museum's acoustics. "Thank you for joining me." Cameras flashed. The press, held back at the edges of the room, went into a frenzy. "He's here." Marcus whispered, his panic momentarily forgotten, replaced by a greedy awe. "He's actually here. This is bigger than we thought." "Shut up, Marcus." Serafina snapped her eyes, darting around, looking for an exit. "Something is wrong." "For 50 years, Julian continued, I have been the steward of Ashford Global. I built it from my father's small shipping company into the entity it is today. But time as it must has come for me." A collective gasp. "Tonight I am here to do 2 things. First, to announce my immediate retirement as chairman and CEO." The room exploded in murmurs. This was the biggest news in the financial world in a decade. Who would take over the board was competent, but there was no clear successor. And second, Julian raised his hand, silencing the crowd once more. "I am here to introduce the new head of the Ashford family, the new matriarch of our legacy, and the new chairwoman and CEO of Ashford Global." Marcus looked at Serafina giddy. "This is it. They're announcing the new internal structure. This is when they'll sign the acquisition." "My successor," Julian said, his voice softening, "is the one person who has always held the key to its future. The one person I trust to lead it with not only a brilliant mind, but with the heart it has so desperately lacked." He turned, holding his hand out toward the top of the stairs, which had been in shadow. "Please, welcome my granddaughter." A figure stepped from the darkness. It was not a junior executive. It was not a faceless board member. It was Alara. She descended the stairs not as a housewife, but as a queen. The sapphire dress seemed to pull all the light in the room onto her. The griffin's heart diamond at her throat flashed with a cold blue fire. Her gaze was not nervous or shy. It was level assessing and utterly terrifyingly cold. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked at only one person: Marcus. The sound Marcus Pierce made was not a word. It was a strangled biological noise, the sound of a man's entire reality collapsing in on him. He dropped his champagne flute. It shattered on the marble floor, but no one heard it over the thunder of 1,000 camera flashes. Serafina Vance was frozen. Her perfectly painted red lips were parted in a silent O of horror. Her mind, usually so quick, so calculating, simply could not process what she was seeing. The mousy beige woman she had mocked was wearing the Ashford diamonds. That's not," Serafina stammered. "That's impossible." Alara reached the bottom of the stairs. She walked past the stunned board members, past the billionaires and politicians, and stood beside her grandfather. She kissed his cheek, then turned to the microphone Benjamin Reed held for her. She looked out at the sea of stunned faces, and then her eyes landed on Marcus and Serafina. She gave them a small, tight smile. It did not reach her eyes. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was clear, crisp, and carried the effortless authority of someone who has never had to raise it to be heard. It was not the voice of the woman who organized bake sales. "My name," she said, her gaze locking with Marcus's, "is Alara Ashford. For 10 years, many of you knew me, if you knew me at all, as Alara Pierce, just a housewife." She let the words hang in the air, a public accusation. The crowd shifted, sensing the blood in the water. "I chose that life," Alara continued, "to see if I could live and be loved for who I was, not for what I was worth. I wanted a normal life. I wanted to build something real." She paused. It was An informative experiment. Elara. Marcus took a step forward, his hand outstretched, a ghastly, pleading smile on his face. Darling, what is this? This is a joke, right? A surprise. Elara looked at him. The entire room watched as the new CEO of Ashford Global regarded the man. It was the look a biologist might give a specimen under a microscope. A surprise. Yes, I suppose it is, Marcus. She turned her gaze to Serafina. And for you too, Miss Vance. Serafina's phone buzzed. And again. And again. She looked down. News alerts. SEC launches formal investigation into Vanguard Capital, CITES stock manipulation. Swiss authorities freeze Zurich accounts linked to Crestview Investments. Serafina looked up, her face ashen, true animalistic fear in her eyes. As my first act as CEO. Elara said into the microphone, her voice resonating with cold power. Ashford Global is formally cancelling all negotiations with Crestview Investments, effective immediately. No, Marcus shouted, lunging forward. No, you can't. We have a deal, Elara, please. We can talk about this. Two Ashford security guards who had materialized silently from the crowd grabbed Marcus by the arms. Furthermore, Elara said, her voice cutting through his protests, Ashford Global is filing a civil suit against Mr. Marcus Pierce and Ms. Serafina Vance for conspiracy to defraud. And on a personal note, she looked directly at Marcus as he struggled against the guards. Mr. Pierce, you referred to me as your pathetic little wife. You conspired to sell my company's assets, assets you didn't even know were mine, to fund a new life with your mistress. You told me to buy a dress and look the part. Well, here I am. She gestured to her gown. This is a Dior. The necklace is Harry Winston. The company is mine. She turned to the guards. He is no longer my husband. He is no longer an employee of any Ashford interest. He is in fact a criminal. Please escort him from my property. Elara. No, you can't do this to me. Marcus roared, his civilized mask completely gone, revealing the desperate, terrified creature beneath. I love you, Elara. The guards dragged him out of the Temple of Dendur, his screams echoing off the ancient stone. The room was silent. Elara then turned her cool gaze to Serafina, who was shaking, cornered. Miss Vance, Elara said, your ambition is noted. You're fired. And I'd advise your consulting firm to review its ethics clause. Oh, and one more thing. The deal you thought you had with Vanguard Capital. It was a fake. You were colluding with them to defraud me. And they were colluding with someone else to defraud you. You were a pawn, Miss Vance. And now you're a liability. Serafina looked as if she'd been slapped. She turned and fled. Pushing through the crowd, her crimson dress a smear of color as she ran in humiliation. Elara watched them both go, her face impassive. She then turned back to the microphone and the stunned, silent audience. My apologies for the housekeeping, she said. She then smiled, a real warm smile that transformed her face. Now, shall we talk about the future of the Ashford Foundation? The crowd, after a beat of stunned silence, erupted into deafening, thunderous applause. The fallout was instantaneous. By 9:30 p.m., the Heiress in hiding was the #1 trending topic worldwide. By 10:00 p.m., stock futures for Vanguard Capital had plummeted into the red. By 11:00 p.m., Marcus Pierce was in a holding cell booked for questioning. Serafina Vance was nowhere to be found. She had reportedly gone straight to her lawyer's office, her phone turned off. But Elara was not focused on the past. She was focused on the future. After her speech, a brilliant, passionate and detailed plan to refocus the $20 billion Ashford Foundation on microloans for women-owned businesses and shelters. Her bake sale work scaled globally. She had set the financial world on fire. She spent the next 2 hours in a whirlwind of conversations, not with fawning socialites, but with global leaders, bank presidents, and philanthropic titans. "Your mother would be so proud," said an elderly duchess, a close friend of her mother's. "She always said you were the cleverest of all." "A brilliant move, Ms. Ashford," said the CEO of JP Morgan Chase. "Restructuring the foundation's debt will free up 30% more capital. I'll have my team on a call with yours tomorrow." Elara moved through the room with a grace and confidence that felt to her like slipping back into her own skin. She wasn't acting. She wasn't Elara Pierce, or even Elara Ashford. She was, for the first time, simply Elara. She found her grandfather by the reflecting pool, watching the scene, a look of profound peace on his face. "You've started a war, child," he said, his voice proud. "I've finished one, grandfather," she corrected. "What they did, it was an infection. I just removed it." "And Marcus," Elara's face hardened for a moment, "he gets exactly what he's entitled to. Our prenuptial agreement, the one he insisted on, states that in the event of a divorce, all assets are split 50-50. Julian looked confused. "But child, that means—" "It means," Elara said, "he gets 50% of his assets, which as of 9 p.m. tonight are less than zero. His stock options are worthless. His bank accounts are frozen. The house in Greenwich is in a trust under my maiden name. He gets half of his credit card debt, and I, in turn, will keep 100% of the Ashford Trust, which I never disclosed to him." Julian Ashford stared at her. You planned this. The prenup. You knew." "I hoped, grandfather. I hoped I'd married a man who loved me. But I am an Ashford. I planned for the man he truly was." Her phone, a new one, issued by Ben, buzzed. It was her lawyer. "Ms. Ashford, Marcus Pierce is requesting to see you. He's at the 19th precinct. He's rambling, saying it's all a terrible misunderstanding. He's asking for you to post his bail." Elara looked at the phone, then at her grandfather. She smiled. "Tell him," she said, "to ask his mistress." She hung up and turned back to the party. The next morning, Elara did not wake up in the Greenwich house. She was in her family's penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, a place that had been kept exactly as her mother had left it. She woke at 5:00 a.m. as she always did, but instead of making coffee for an ungrateful husband, she was met by her new chief of staff. By 6:00 a.m. she was in the main Ashford Global boardroom on the 80th floor, the city lights still twinkling below her. The board was assembled the same men who had been stunned into silence last night. "Good morning, gentlemen," Elara said, taking her seat at the head of the massive obsidian table, her grandfather's seat. "I'm sure you've all read the preliminary reports from PricewaterhouseCoopers." The room was tense. They had expected a socialite. They were facing a strategist. "The Vanguard Capital leak was effective," said one of the older board members, a man named Henderson. "But it's cost us. The stock is volatile." "It's not a leak, Mr. Henderson," Elara said, opening her laptop. "It's a controlled burn. We've exposed a competitor's deep-seated corruption. We took a 3% dip in pre-market trading. They've lost 60% of their value. I call that a win." She projected a file onto the main screen. This is not our problem. This is. The screen filled with a list of stagnant, underperforming assets. We have $4 billion tied up in old-world fossil fuels and speculative real estate. It's lazy. It's my grandfather's way. No offense, Julian, she said, nodding to her grandfather who was attending via a video link from the penthouse, looking happier than he had in years. None taken child. It was lazy. As of today, Elara announced, we are divesting, all of it. We are liquidating these assets and redirecting the full $4 billion into our new Ashford Future Division, Renewable Energy Biotech and AI Ethics. We are no longer a 20th century company. We are a 21st century one. Any questions? The board was silent, stunned by the sheer scale and speed of her move. This was not a transition. It was a revolution. Henderson stammered. This will take months, years even, to untangle. It will take 6 weeks, Elara said. I've already modeled the divestment. The plan is on your tablets. I expect the first phase to be executed by Monday. She stood up. I'm not here to be a placeholder. I'm not here to be a figurehead. I'm here to work. My housewife days taught me one thing: efficiency. I ran a $5 million charity on a $50,000 budget. Imagine what I can do with $50 billion. She looked at every single person in the eyes. You are either with me or you are in my way. Decide. You have until the end of the day. She walked out of the boardroom, leaving a group of the most powerful men in New York, utterly speechless. While Elara was remaking a global empire, Marcus Pierce was sitting in a bare white interrogation room. His tuxedo was rumpled, his hair a mess. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving him a shaking, terrified wreck. I don't understand, he kept repeating to the detective. You have to call her. She's my wife, Elara Ashford. It's a mistake, Mr. Pierce, the detective said, sipping his coffee. Your wife is currently in a board meeting. Her lawyer, however, has been very helpful. The door opened, and a tired-looking public defender walked in. Mr. Pierce, I'm your court-appointed attorney. Court-appointed? Marcus laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. I'm worth millions. I don't need a public defender. Call my lawyer. Call Bill. We did, the defender said, sitting down. His firm dropped you as a client this morning, citing irreconcilable conflicts of interest. Apparently they also work for Ashford Global. Marcus's face fell. What, no? Listen, Marcus, you're in a lot of trouble. The SEC has you dead to rights on securities fraud. The Swiss have frozen your accounts. And your wife? Well, she's filed for divorce. Divorce, no, she can't. She can. And she has. She's also provided the DA with a very thorough dossier. Texts, bank records, recorded phone calls. This one's from a Serafina V. The defender read from a paper. He's just desperate enough to sign anything. And his pathetic little wife, he actually called her domestic. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. She knew. She knew everything. It appears so, the lawyer said. And Miss Vance, she's been granted immunity in exchange for her full testimony against you, and Vanguard Capital. That witch, Marcus slammed his fist on the table. She set me up. Looks like a lot of people set you up, Marcus, the lawyer said. Right now your only play is a plea bargain. With this much evidence, they're going to bury you. Marcus Pierce, the man who had dismissed his wife as just a housewife, finally understood. He had never been the player. He had never even been on the board. He was the piece, and he had just been swept off it. He put his head in his hands, the reality of his arrogance crashing down on him. He was a man with nothing. No job, no money, no mistress, and a wife who was it, turned out one of the most powerful women in the world. And she hated him. 3 months later, the headline on Forbes magazine read, "The Ashford Revolution: How Elara Ashford Added $30 billion to her empire by thinking like a housewife." The article detailed her domestic approach. She cut waste. She focused on community. The Ashford Foundation, she cleaned house, firing 40% of the redundant, overpaid C-suite executives, and she invested in the home, her $4 billion pivot to sustainable energy, which was already posting record returns. Elara herself was not in the penthouse. She was in the newly renovated wing of the Haven Women's Shelter, the one her little charity gala had been raising money for. After the ball, she had personally written a check to complete the funding, and then had the Ashford Foundation match it, building a new state-of-the-art facility. She was not wearing Dior. She was in jeans and a simple sweater, painting a wall. "You know," said Maria, the shelter director, and her friend, handing her a roller, "you're a lot more famous than the last time you were here. I had to shoo away 3 paparazzi." "They'll get bored," Elara laughed, painting a long, even stroke of pale blue. "They're waiting for me to go to a club or crash a car. They don't find philanthropic manual labor very exciting." "Well, we're glad to have you. The Elara Ashford Center for Economic Independence sounds a lot better than the new wing." "It's just a name, Maria." "It's a symbol," Maria said, stopping. "You know, for years you'd come here, so quiet, so efficient. You were the best organizer we ever had. But there was always a sadness to you. A wall. That wall is gone. You seem happy." Elara stopped painting and looked at her friend. "I am. For 10 years I tried to be someone I wasn't. I hid. I thought being just a housewife was a disguise. But I wasn't pretending. I loved this work. I loved organizing. I loved a balanced budget. I loved making something out of nothing. I was doing it on the wrong scale." She looked around the beautiful, bright room where women would soon be learning to kyat and build businesses. Marcus thought housewife was an insult. He thought it meant stupid. He didn't realize that running a home, running a charity, running a life, that's the most difficult CEO job in the world. He didn't just underestimate me, Elara Ashford. He underestimated all of us. A young associate from her office poked her head in. "Ms. Ashford, sorry to interrupt. Mr. Henderson is on the line. The final divestment is complete." Elara nodded. "Tell him I'll be there in an hour, and tell the jet to be ready. I'm flying to the new solar plant in Arizona tonight." She turned back to Maria, smiling. One last wall. 1 year later. Julian Ashford sat on the porch at Griffin's Ledge, watching the sunset paint the lake in gold and purple. He was weaker, but he was still here. He had held on. He heard footsteps and smiled as Elara sat beside him, wrapping a blanket over his legs. "You made it," he whispered. "I told you I'd be here for the weekend," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "The board can survive without me for 48 hours. "How is everything?" "Marcus Pierce," she said, her voice neutral, was sentenced to 8 years for fraud. He'll be out in 4 with good behavior. "And Ms. Vance, she's working as a consultant in Dubai, She'll never work in the US or Europe again. She's irrelevant. Good. He sighed a sound of contentment. And the company? We just broke ground on the first fully carbon-neutral shipping fleet. The Ashford Foundation is now a global leader in women's economic empowerment. And I finally sold the Greenwich house. I gave the proceeds to the Haven shelter. You did good, child. You did what I never could. You gave the name a soul. They sat in silence watching the stars appear. Elara was no longer a housewife, not really. She was a CEO, a philanthropist, a global power. But she still, on quiet weekends, baked her grandfather's favorite bread. She still balanced her own checkbook. She had not shed her housewife skin. She had simply shown the world that the skills of a housewife scaled up were the skills that could run the world. She had been called just a housewife as an insult, but she had turned it into a title of power, resilience, and quiet, unassailable strength. The woman who had been dismissed was now the woman who could not be ignored, and she was finally exactly where she was supposed to be. Thank you for listening to this story of karma revenge and the power of a woman who was dangerously underestimated. We've all felt invisible at times, dismissed by people who are too arrogant to see our true worth. Elara's story is a reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. They're not just listening, they're planning. What did you think of Marcus's ultimate downfall? Was it an ending you saw coming? Let me know your favorite twist in the comments below. If you love stories where the underdog gets their ultimate revenge, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a good story, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell. You won't want to miss the drama we have coming up next. Thanks for watching. He was a king, and the city was his court. Damien Blackwood, a titan of industry, stood under the grand chandeliers of the Metropolitan Legacy Gala. A smug grin plastered on his face. On his arm was not his wife, but his mistress, a starlet draped in diamonds, a symbol of his power. He thought his pregnant wife Isabella was at home, a forgotten chapter in his ascent. He believed he had all the power, held all the cards. But in a world of secrets and lies, the most dangerous person isn't the one who shouts, but the one who waits. Tonight, the stage was set for his greatest triumph, but he failed to read the program. A surprise guest was about to be announced, and his entire world was about to burn to the ground. The air in the grand ballroom of Cipriani Wall Street was thick with the scent of money, power, and expensive perfume. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. This was the Metropolitan Legacy Gala, the undisputed pinnacle of New York's philanthropic calendar, where billionaires wrote seven-figure checks between sips of vintage Dom Perignon and whispered about the rise and fall of empires. And tonight, there was no empire more celebrated than that of Damien Blackwood. At 38, Damien was the man of the hour, the year, the decade. His firm, Blackwood Capital, had just orchestrated a hostile takeover so audacious, so brilliant, that the Wall Street Journal had compared him to a modern-day Rockefeller. He was handsome in a cruel, sharp way, with eyes the color of cold steel, and a smile that could disarm a boardroom or break a heart with equal ease. He moved through the crowd like a shark, a predator in his element. And on his arm, clinging to him with a possessive gleam in her eye, was Seraphina Dubois. She was an actress whose fame was eclipsed only by her ambition. Dressed in a scandalously crimson gown that left little to the imagination, She wore a cascade of Cartier diamonds around her neck, a gift from Damien, a very public statement. "Darling Robert Sterling is staring," Serafina murmured, her voice a sultry purr. "He looks positively green. I think he wanted that Ethelred acquisition for himself." Damien's smile widened. He squeezed her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Let him stare. The old guard needs to learn what the future looks like. It looks like us." The us was a dagger, and everyone there knew it. Damien Blackwood was a married man. His wife Isabella Rossi was a name whispered with a mixture of pity and curiosity. She was the quiet architect he had married 5 years ago, before his meteoric rise. She was beautiful, intelligent, and from a respectable, if not stratospherically wealthy family of Italian artisans. She was also, as society pages had recently confirmed, 7 months pregnant with their first child, and she was nowhere to be seen. "A shame Isabella couldn't make it," commented an elderly woman, Beatrice Vanderbilt, a doyenne of old money, whose disapproval was a social death sentence. "The final trimester can be so draining." Damien feigned a look of concerned regret. "She sends her deepest apologies, Beatrice. The doctor insisted she rest. Her health and the baby's is my top priority." The lie slid off his tongue as smoothly as the aged scotch in his glass. Isabella wasn't resting. He hadn't spoken to her in 2 days, not since their last sterile conversation about nursery furniture. He knew she was at home in their sterile white-on-white penthouse overlooking Central Park, a gilded cage he had built for her, and then promptly abandoned. He saw the looks, the exchanged glances between society wives and their powerful husbands. They saw Serafina brazen and triumphant, and they saw Isabella's conspicuous absence. In their world, affairs were common, but flaunting them so openly at an event of this magnitude was a breach of protocol. It was a declaration of intent. He was casting off the old and embracing the new. His COO, Marcus Thorne, a man whose loyalty Damien had always taken for granted, approached him with a tight expression. "Damien, a word." "Can it wait?" "Marcus." "Serafina was just about to tell me about her new film deal." Marcus's gaze flickered to Serafina, a flicker of something unreadable, distaste perhaps, before settling back on Damien. "It's about the keynote speaker. There's been a last-minute change to the program." Damien waved a dismissive hand. "Don't bother me with logistics. As long as the check I wrote clears, they can have a dancing bear give the speech for all I care." He turned his back on Marcus, pulling Serafina closer. He wanted everyone to see them. He wanted the world to understand that he took what he wanted. And right now he wanted this fiery, ambitious creature, not the quiet, gentle woman who carried his child. He felt an intoxicating rush of power, a sense of absolute invincibility. He had conquered Wall Street. He had the most talked-about woman in the city on his arm. He was untouchable. Across the room, journalists scribbled in their notepads. Penelope Croft, a notorious columnist for New York society, watched Damien and Serafina with a predatory focus. Her headline was already writing itself Blackwood debuts newest asset as pregnant wife stays home. It would be the talk of the town for weeks. The lights in the ballroom began to dim, signaling the start of the evening's official program. The host, a famous news anchor, took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your incredible generosity tonight." The anchor began, his voice booming through the sound system. "We have raised a record-breaking sum for the Children's Literacy Foundation." A polite, self-congratulatory applause filled the room. Damien clapped along, one arm wrapped possessively around Serafina's waist. He leaned in and whispered, "My donation was the largest. They're about to name a new library wing after me." Serafina looked up at him with adoring eyes. "My brilliant, generous man." On stage, the anchor continued. "And now, we have a very special presentation. Originally, we were to be addressed by the mayor, but he was unfortunately called away. However, we have a surprise keynote speaker who has graciously stepped in. A person who embodies the spirit of building a better future, not just with steel and glass, but with resilience, integrity, and a quiet strength that will undoubtedly inspire us all." Damien barely listened, more interested in the way the light caught the diamonds on Serafina's neck. He was bored. He was ready for the adulation, the back-patting, the envy. "Please join me." The anchor's voice boomed, pulling him from his reverie, in giving a warm welcome to the renowned architect and the visionary behind the new Children's Wing project, Mrs. Isabella Rossi Blackwood. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the side of the stage. And for the first time that night, Damien Blackwood's smug smile faltered. The name echoed in the vast hall, seeming to bounce off every crystal and every stunned, silent face. He blinked, certain he had misheard. It had to be a mistake. But then she emerged from the wings. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a cold, clammy dread. It was Isabella, his wife, and she was walking directly toward the podium. Isabella moved into the spotlight with a grace that defied her 7-month pregnancy. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be a ghost, a footnote, a problem to be managed later. But here she was in the flesh, a vision of impossible serenity. She wore a simple, elegant gown of deep emerald silk that draped beautifully over her swollen belly. Her dark hair was swept back, revealing a pair of antique sapphire earrings, her grandmother's the only jewelry she wore. Her face, which Damien had last seen pale, with unspoken sorrow, was now composed, her expression calm and unreadable. She looked, to his utter disbelief, magnificent. A collective silent gasp rippled through the ballroom. Every eye swiveled from Isabella on the stage to Damien and the scarlet-clad woman frozen by his side. The air crackled with a sudden, delicious tension. This was no longer a charity gala. It was a coliseum, and the lions had just been released. Serafina's manicured fingers tightened on Damien's arm, like a vice. "What is she doing here?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "Damien, do something." But Damien couldn't move. He was paralyzed, his mind struggling to process the scene. His meticulously crafted world, with its neat compartments for wife and mistress business and pleasure, was collapsing in on itself. This was not part of the plan. Isabella didn't do things like this. She was quiet, reserved, conflict-averse. She was the one who smoothed things over, who managed the household staff with quiet efficiency, who endured his moods and his absences without a word of complaint. The woman on that stage was a stranger to him. Isabella reached the podium and adjusted the microphone, the sound echoing in the tomb-like silence. She scanned the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the city's elite. For a fleeting moment, her eyes met Damien's. There was no hatred in them, no anger, no tears. There was something far more, terrifying resolve. Then her gaze slid past him to Serafina, holding for a fraction of a second longer. A look of cool clinical assessment, as if observing a particularly uninteresting insect. In that single glance, she dismissed her. Serafina visibly flinched, her mask of sultry confidence cracking. To understand the depth of Damien's shock, One had to understand the lie of their marriage. He had courted Isabella for her class and her quiet stability. The Rossis were respected a family of master craftsmen and architects who valued legacy over flashy wealth. Marrying Isabella had been a strategic move, lending his ruthless, new money ambition a veneer of old-world respectability. He had mistaken her gentleness for weakness. He had mistaken her silence for submission. The affair with Serafina had begun 6 months prior. It was a cliché, a torrid, exhilarating escape from the quiet predictability of his life. Serafina was everything Isabella was not: loud, demanding, and insatiably ambitious. She fed his ego, celebrated his ruthlessness, and made him feel like the king he believed himself to be. The moment he learned of Isabella's pregnancy, a cold calculation had settled in his heart. The timing was inconvenient. A baby, a family, it was a tether. He had started to lay the groundwork for an exit subtly moving assets consulting with divorce lawyers who specialized in protecting the wealthier party. He had assumed Isabella heartbroken and heavy with child would be easy to manage. He would give her a generous settlement. She would retreat from public life with their child, and he would be free to build his new life with Serafina. He had underestimated her on every conceivable level. The memory of how she'd likely discovered the full extent of his betrayal flashed in his mind. 2 weeks ago, he'd been careless. A credit card statement left on his home office desk, not for his personal card, but for a corporate account he used for discretionary expenses. It listed a $250,000 charge from Cartier. He had told Isabella the company had purchased corporate gifts, but the detailed receipt which he had foolishly tucked inside the statement told a different story. It detailed the Serafina necklace, a custom piece. He remembered coming home that evening to find the statement exactly where he'd left it. Isabella had said nothing. She had been quiet, withdrawn, and he had attributed it to pregnancy hormones, feeling a flicker of annoyance rather than guilt. He hadn't realized he wasn't witnessing a woman breaking down. He was witnessing a woman taking notes. Now, standing on that stage, she was not the woman he had left in that penthouse. She was a general surveying the battlefield before the first volley. She leaned into the microphone, her voice clear and steady, devoid of any tremor. "Good evening," she began. "My name is Isabella Rossi. Some of you know me as Damien Blackwood's wife, others as an architect. Tonight, I am here to speak about legacies, the ones we build, the ones we inherit, and the ones we must sometimes tear down to make way for something better." Damien's heart hammered against his ribs. Rossi. She had used her maiden name first. It was a small detail, but it was a declaration of war. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him dissecting his reaction. He tried to compose his features into a mask of placid confusion, of a husband surprised but proud of his wife's impromptu appearance. But the sweat beading on his brow betrayed him. Marcus Thorne, his COO, was standing near the edge of the room, his face grim. He wasn't looking at the stage. He was looking directly at Damien. And in that moment, a sickening realization dawned. Marcus knew. He had known this was going to happen. The betrayal was deeper and more complex than he could ever have imagined. This wasn't a spontaneous, emotional outburst from a scorned wife. This was a coup, and it had been planned with military precision. Isabella's voice flowed over the silent audience, a calm river that belied the torrent of devastation it was about to unleash. "We are here tonight to support the Children's Literacy Foundation," she said, her tone even and warm. "A cause dedicated to providing children with the tools to build their own futures, to write their own stories. A story is a powerful thing. It can be a shelter, a map, or a weapon. It all depends on who is telling it, and why. Damien watched, mesmerized and horrified. This was a performance, and she was in complete control. The audience was leaning in, captivated by this pregnant, serene woman who had appeared like an apparition. They had expected a tearful, humiliated wife. They were getting something else entirely. For the past 5 years, Isabella continued, her gaze sweeping the room, but never landing on him. I have been part of a story. The story of Blackwood Capital, a tale of ambition, innovation, and unprecedented success. I have watched from the sidelines as my husband, Damien Blackwood, built an empire. A smattering of polite applause broke out. Damien forced a tight, pained smile. She was praising him. What was this? Was she trying to win him back with a public display of loyalty? The thought was so absurd, it was almost laughable. I put my own career, my own name, Rossi, on hold to support that vision, she went on, her voice gaining a new, harder edge. I believed in the story we were writing together, a partnership, a legacy for the child we are expecting. She paused, placing a hand gently on her stomach. The gesture was both maternal and fiercely protective. It was a reminder to everyone in the room of what was at stake and the depth of the betrayal they were all witnessing. But stories like buildings can have faulty foundations. They can be built on half-truths and secrets that over time cause cracks in the facade. And if those cracks are not addressed, the entire structure will inevitably collapse. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. The subtext was now text. This was no longer a keynote speech. It was a public indictment. Serafina was practically vibrating with fury beside him. "Make her stop," she hissed through clenched teeth. "This is a disaster. Your reputation." "Shut up!" Damien snapped, his eyes glued to the stage. His mind was racing, trying to find an angle, a way to spin this. He could claim she was unwell, distraught, due to her pregnancy, not in her right mind. He could have security escort her off the stage. But he knew it was too late. The damage was already done. The bomb had been armed, and she was about to detonate it. "I discovered recently," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a more intimate, conspiratorial level, drawing the audience in even further, that the story of Blackwood Capital was not entirely as it seemed. Its success was built not only on brilliant strategy, but on a culture of moral compromise, on deals made in shadows, on promises broken, on a foundation not of granite, but of sand. Murmurs erupted around the room. This was about more than infidelity now. She was attacking the company. She was attacking him. And so, Isabella declared, her voice ringing with newfound authority, I was left with a choice. Do I allow the legacy my child is set to inherit to be one built on deceit? Do I stand by silently while the name Blackwood becomes synonymous, not with success but with scandal? She paused, letting the rhetorical question hang in the air. I chose to act. I chose to build something new. Damien felt a cold dread unlike anything he had ever known. It was the feeling of a king realizing his throne was made of cardboard. What did she mean she chose to act? What could she possibly do? She was an architect. She had no power, no influence in his world. The anchor who had introduced her stepped forward slightly, a confused look on his face, as if wondering whether to intervene. But Isabella held up a hand, a gesture of command that stopped him in his tracks. You see, there is a part of the Blackwood Capital story that has never been made public, she announced. When Damien started his firm 10 years ago, he did so with the help of a silent partner, a primary investor who believed in his potential but wished to remain anonymous. This investor provided the seed capital, a 70% stake that launched the company. The ballroom was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Damien's world tilted on its axis. The seed capital that had come from an anonymous trust. He'd never questioned it, assuming it was from some eccentric old-money billionaire who enjoyed backing long shots. He'd never been able to uncover the source. That investment was made not just in a company, but in a man who was about to marry into my family. Isabella revealed, her voice clear as a bell. The silent partner, the majority shareholder of Blackwood Capital, was never a mystery to me. It was my father, Giovanni Rossi. The name landed like a cannonball. Giovanni Rossi. The quiet, unassuming master artisan. Damien's mind reeled. He remembered his father-in-law as a man who worked with his hands, who spoke of wood grain and structural integrity, who seemed utterly unimpressed by Damien's talk of derivatives and market caps. He had dismissed him as a simple provincial man. And all this time that simple man had owned him, per the terms of the investment contract. Isabella continued, her eyes finally locking onto Damien's, with the chilling finality of a judge passing sentence. The Rossi family retained the right to call a vote of no confidence in the CEO and transfer its controlling shares to a designated heir in the event of gross moral or ethical turpitude that threatened the family's name and investment. Flaunting an affair while your pregnant wife is at home, I believe that qualifies. She took a step forward away from the podium, her presence filling the stage. As of 6 p.m. this evening, an emergency meeting of the board was convened. My father invoked his right. He transferred his entire 70% stake to me. The board, including COO Marcus Thorne. She nodded toward Marcus, who met her gaze with a solemn nod of his own. Has voted. Damien Blackwood has been removed as CEO of Blackwood Capital, effective immediately. A tidal wave of gasps and shocked exclamations washed over the room. Damien went completely deathly pale. His legs felt weak, his breath caught in his throat. This wasn't happening. It was a nightmare. He looked at Serafina, but her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The man she had attached herself to, the source of her diamonds and her future, had just been publicly castrated. Isabella wasn't finished. She raised her voice to be heard over the rising din. My name is Isabella Rossi, she declared, her voice resonating with power and purpose. And as the new majority shareholder and chairwoman of the board, I want to assure our investors and partners that the company is entering a new era. An era of transparency, integrity, and sustainable growth. We will no longer build on sand. We will build on stone. A new legacy begins tonight. The moment the words, effective immediately, left Isabella's lips, the carefully constructed civility of the gala shattered. The room which seconds before had been a sea of stunned silence erupted into a chaotic symphony of noise. The low murmur of whispers exploded into frantic conversation. Cell phones, previously hidden away, emerged in 100 hands, their screens glowing as investors, rivals, and gossips scrambled to text, call, and tweet the news that was breaking like a financial earthquake. Damien Blackwood was out. Deposed. Publicly, spectacularly annihilated. He just stood there, rooted to the spot, the world around him blurring into a cacophony of sound and motion. The champagne glass in his hand slipped from his nerveless fingers and shattered on the floor, the sound lost in the growing uproar. Serafina next to him let out a small, strangled gasp. Her carefully constructed fantasy of a future as Mrs. Blackwood 2.0 dissolving before her eyes. The Cartier diamonds around her neck suddenly felt like a lead weight. On stage, Isabella remained a pillar of calm in the storm she had created. She gave a slight, dignified nod to the audience, ignoring the chaos, and turned to walk off stage. She was immediately flanked by two large men in dark suits, whom Damien had never seen before. Her own security. They escorted her toward a side exit, creating a protective bubble around her, shielding her from the frenzy. The spell of paralysis broke. A primal rage, hot and blinding, surged through Damien. He lunged forward, shoving a startled investment banker out of his way. "Isabella!" He roared, his voice raw with fury and disbelief. He had to get to her. He had to confront her, to undo this. This was his company, his life, his name. She couldn't just take it. But her security team was efficient. They formed a wall between him and the exit, their expressions impassive. Marcus Thorne appeared at their side, his face set like stone. "Don't, Damien," Marcus said, his voice low and firm. "It's over." "Over." Damien spat his face, contorted with rage. "You backstabbing traitor! You were in on this. You helped her." "I did what was right for the company," Marcus replied coolly, not flinching from Damien's fury. "You were a liability. Your arrogance, your recklessness. It was going to destroy everything eventually. Isabella is saving it." Saving it. She's an architect. What does she know about running a multi-billion-dollar firm? You'd be surprised what a person can learn when they're underestimated their entire life, Marcus said, before turning his back and following Isabella out the door. The door clicked shut behind them, a sound of absolute finality. Damien was left standing there, abandoned and exposed. The sharks were circling. Robert Sterling, the rival he had gloated about earlier, was now watching him with a look of pure, unadulterated schadenfreude. Penelope Croft, the journalist, was furiously typing on her phone, her eyes alight with the thrill of the scoop of a lifetime. This was better than a mere infidelity scandal. This was a corporate coup d'etat, a dynastic drama playing out in real time. He felt a tug on his sleeve. It was Serafina. Her face was a mess of confusion and panic. "Damien, what does this mean?" she asked, her voice shrill. "What's going to happen? The press is everywhere." "What does it mean?" Damien laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "It means the party's over." He looked at her, at the crimson dress, the borrowed diamonds, the desperate ambition in her eyes. She wasn't a partner. She was a perk of the job he no longer had. An accessory. And right now she was an anchor pulling him down faster. "Get away from me," he snarled, shrugging off her hand as if it were contaminated. Her face fell, shock turning to indignation. "What? After everything, you were a diversion, a trinket. Look around you, it's all gone." He gestured wildly at the room, at the people staring and whispering. His empire had crumbled in less than 10 minutes, and she was worried about the press. His words hit her like a slap. The calculated adoration in her eyes hardened into pure contempt. Without another word, she turned on her heel and disappeared into the crowd, already calculating her next move, distancing herself from the wreckage of his life. Left utterly alone in the center of the storm, Damien's rage began to curdle into a chilling fear. The full implications of what had just happened began to sink in. Giovanni Rossi, his quiet, unassuming father-in-law, a man he'd patronized, gifting him expensive watches he never wore and first-class tickets he often refused. He remembered a conversation years ago in Rossi's workshop, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and varnish. "A man's legacy, Damien," Giovanni had said, running a hand over a piece of century-old oak is not what he acquires, it's what he builds, and it must be built on a foundation of honor. Without that, it is nothing but a house of cards. Damien had smiled condescendingly, thinking the old man hopelessly naive. Now the words echoed in his mind as a prophecy fulfilled. He had built a house of cards, and his wife Giovanni's daughter had just blown it down with a single breath. His phone buzzed. It was his bank's private wealth manager. He ignored it. It buzzed again. His corporate counsel. Then a dozen more notifications. A flood of messages from board members, investors, and so-called friends, all demanding answers, all distancing themselves. The empire wasn't just gone. It had been methodically, surgically, and masterfully taken from him by the one person in the world he had never, not for a single second, considered a threat. He had been so focused on the rivals in front of him that he never saw the architect designing his ruin from right inside his own home. The days that followed the gala were a blur of humiliation for Damien. The story was everywhere. It wasn't just on the society pages. It was the lead story on Bloomberg, Forbes, and the Financial Times. The Blackwood coup, they called it. The architect's revenge. How Wall Street's Icarus was grounded by his unseen partner. Isabella Rossi became an overnight sensation, a feminist icon, a business wunderkind. Photos of her serene and pregnant on the gala stage were juxtaposed with photos of Damien pale and shell-shocked, and Serafina fleeing the event in disgrace. His life as he knew it was systematically dismantled. His corporate credit cards were declined. His access to the Blackwood Capitol building was revoked. When he tried to return to the penthouse to retrieve his things, he was met at the door by one of Isabella's new security guards and informed that his presence was not welcome. His personal belongings had been packed and sent to a storage unit. He tried to fight back. He called his lawyers, screaming at them to find a loophole to sue Isabella, her father, the board. Their response was calm and devastating. The contract was ironclad. The moral turpitude clause was airtight, and Damien's public flaunting of his affair provided more than enough evidence. Marcus Thorne had meticulously documented every expense, every trip, every lie, and presented it to the board. The vote had been unanimous. He had no legal recourse. He was locked out of his own life, forced to watch from the sidelines as Isabella took control with an efficiency that was staggering. What Damien couldn't see were the months of quiet, painstaking planning that had preceded the gala. The story had not begun with the Cartier receipt. It had begun almost a year earlier with a subtle shift in Damien's behavior. The late nights he claimed were meetings, the scent of a different perfume on his suits, the emotional distance that had grown into a chasm. Isabella was an architect. Her mind was trained to see the structure beneath the surface, to understand that small hairline cracks could signal deep foundational flaws. She didn't confront him. She observed. She gathered data. Using her own savings, she hired a private investigator, a discreet professional who confirmed her suspicions with a portfolio of heartbreaking evidence photos of Damien and Serafina in Paris, London, and at a private villa in Lake Como. The pain of the betrayal was immense, a physical ache in her chest. For weeks she grieved for the man she thought she had married and the future she thought they would build. She cried in the silent, empty rooms of their penthouse, one hand on her growing belly, feeling utterly alone. But Isabella Rossi was her father's daughter. She was descended from a long line of builders, not victims. And as the initial shock subsided, her grief began to harden into something else resolve. She called her father. She didn't cry or scream. She laid out the facts calmly, logically, as if presenting a design proposal. Giovanni Rossi listened in silence from his workshop in Tuscany, where he'd been overseeing a restoration project. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "The foundation is rotten," he finally said, his voice heavy. "You cannot build a family on a rotten foundation. What do you want to do, mia cara?" "I don't want a divorce settlement," Isabella said, her voice firm. "I don't want his money. I want to protect the legacy, our legacy, the one you invested in." That was when Giovanni reminded her of the clause, the one his lawyers had insisted upon a decade ago, a clause to protect the family name should the ambitious young man he was backing ever forget where he came from. The plan began to take shape. Isabella flew to Tuscany. In her father's quiet study, overlooking the rolling hills, they mapped out their strategy. Giovanni made one call to Marcus Thorne. Marcus had been with Blackwood Capital from the beginning. He was a decent man who had grown increasingly disgusted by Damien's hubris and cruelty. He admired Isabella's intelligence and grace and felt a deep sense of loyalty to the company's true foundation. When Giovanni Rossi called him and laid out the situation, Marcus didn't hesitate. His allegiance shifted. For the next 3 months, Isabella worked in secret. She was no stranger to complex projects. She had overseen the design and construction of skyscrapers. A corporate takeover, she discovered, was not so different. It required precision, a deep understanding of the structure and the right team. While Damien was distracted by his affair and his latest conquest on Wall Street, Isabella was studying. Guided by Marcus and a team of corporate lawyers her father hired, she devoured every document related to the company financials, investment portfolios, personnel files. She learned the business from the inside out, not from a CEO's 30,000-foot view, but from the ground up. She discovered Damien's reckless gambles, the toxic work environment he fostered, and the simmering resentment among his employees. She chose the Metropolitan Legacy Gala as her stage. It was Damien's coronation, the night he would be celebrating his own greatness. The irony was too perfect to resist. She used her role as the architect for the foundation's new wing to secure the surprise keynote speaker slot, telling the organizers only that she was representing a major anonymous donor who wished to make a official announcement. The day of the gala, she was a whirlwind of calm, focused activity. She signed the share transfer documents with her father. She held a video conference with the board, minus Damien, where Marcus presented the case against him. The vote was swift and decisive. She selected her security team. She wrote her speech, every word carefully chosen for maximum impact. When she walked into that ballroom, she was not a woman scorned. She was a CEO taking possession of her company. Her pregnancy was not a vulnerability. It was her armor, a symbol of the future she was fighting to protect. She didn't do it for revenge. Revenge was too small, too petty. She did it for the integrity of the name Rossi, for the employees of the company who deserved better, and for the child who would one day ask her about their father. She wanted to be able to provide an answer that wasn't about weakness, but about strength. She wanted to tell them a story, not of a broken home, but of a legacy reclaimed. In the weeks that followed, Damien Blackwood learned the true meaning of the word alone. The phone calls stopped. The invitations dried up. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid him. He was a pariah, a walking cautionary tale whispered about at exclusive country clubs and over expensive lunches he could no longer afford. His financial situation was dire. His assets were almost entirely tied up in Blackwood Capital stock options, which were now worthless to him. The lawyers he had on retainer for his divorce were now billing him exorbitant amounts to tell him he had no case. He was forced to move out of his hotel suite and into a small, generic, rented apartment, a place that felt like a prison after the sprawling penthouse. He tried to find work, but his name was toxic. No one on Wall Street would touch him. His spectacular public downfall had made him a liability. His reputation for brilliance was now overshadowed by his reputation for arrogance and catastrophic misjudgment. He had flown too close to the sun, and everyone had watched him burn. One evening, deep in a haze of self-pity and expensive whiskey, his doorbell rang. It was Serafina. She looked different without the designer clothes and professional makeup. Smaller, harder. "I need to talk to you," she said, pushing past him into the apartment. "What do you want?" he slurred. "The press won't leave me alone," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "My agent dropped me. A film I was up for a career-making role, they gave it to someone else. They said I bring too much baggage. My life is ruined because of you." Damien laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "Your life? You think this is about you? I lost everything. You deserve to lose everything," she shot back, her voice rising. "You lied to me, Damien. You told me you were leaving her. You made me believe we had a future. I was a fool. I attached myself to a sinking ship. So you came here to tell me that to kick me while I'm down." "No," she said, her expression turning cold. "I came here for payment, for my silence. I know about the Ethelred deal. I know you paid off a regulator to get it approved. I was there when you took the call." Damien stared at her. The alcoholic fog in his brain momentarily clearing, replaced by a wave of ice-cold panic. The Ethelred deal was his masterpiece, but it had a dark secret. He had bribed an SEC official to look the other way on an antitrust concern. It was the one skeleton in his closet that could lead to actual prison time. "You wouldn't," he breathed. "Try me," Serafina said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "I need to salvage my career and my reputation. A tell-all book, an exclusive interview. A story about the brave young actress who was manipulated by a corrupt Wall Street monster. It has a certain ring to it. Unless, of course, I have a reason to forget what I know. A very, very good reason." He saw it then, the raw, transactional nature of their entire relationship. He had been her mark, and now she was cashing out. He was no longer a king, just a disgraced man with one last secret to sell. Meanwhile, Isabella was thriving. The initial market shock over the CEO change quickly subsided, replaced by a growing sense of confidence. Isabella proved to be a natural leader. She was decisive, intelligent, and unlike Damien, she listened. Her first act as chairwoman was to hold a company-wide town hall. She didn't hide in a corner office. She stood before the hundreds of employees, spoke with transparency about the challenges ahead, and laid out a new vision for the company, one based on ethical practices and long-term value, not short-term gambles. She promoted talented women who had been overlooked by Damien. She implemented a more generous parental leave policy. She rebranded the firm, changing the name from Blackwood Capital to Rossi Thorn Legacy, elevating Marcus to CEO while she remained chairwoman. The press, which had been so captivated by the drama, was now captivated by her competence. She gave one exclusive interview to a respected female journalist from Forbes. She didn't sling mud. She spoke about her architectural background, applying principles of design, strong foundations, functional elegance, building for longevity to business. She spoke of the legacy she wanted to build for her child. She was poised, brilliant, and in control. The market responded. Investors who had been wary were now impressed. The stock, after an initial dip, began to climb steadier and more robust than ever. She was proving that integrity wasn't just good morals, it was good business. One afternoon, sitting in her new office, a space she had redesigned herself with warm woods, clean lines, and an abundance of natural light, she received a call. It was from a divorce lawyer. Not hers, but Damien's. He was finally ready to settle. His demands were gone. He would sign whatever she put in front of him. She hung up the phone and looked out the window at the New York skyline, a panorama of steel and glass ambition. For a long time, she had felt like a small, insignificant part of that landscape, a shadow to her husband's towering presence. Now she was one of its architects. She had not just torn down Damien's house of cards. She had built a fortress in its place. 6 months after the gala, in the sterile, quiet hush of a private suite at Lenox Hill Hospital, Isabella Rossi held her new world in her arms. She had given birth to a son, a healthy 7-pound miracle with a full head of dark hair and eyes that, when they opened, were a startlingly familiar shade of steel grey. She named him Giovanni, a tribute to the man whose quiet strength had been the bedrock of her own. As she rocked the baby, the city lights twinkling far below, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a calm that was not the absence of a storm, but the solid ground on the other side of it. The fight hadn't just been for a company. It had been for this tiny, perfect life, for the story she would one day be proud to tell him. Life found a new, demanding yet deeply fulfilling rhythm. The roles of mother and chairwoman were not mutually exclusive. Isabella discovered they informed one another. In the boardroom, she approached decisions with a new perspective, a fierce maternal instinct to protect and nurture the company for the long term. She was not the ruthless corporate raider Damien had been. She was an architect. She thought in terms of decades, not quarters. She invested in her people, implementing industry-leading parental leave policies, mentorship programs, and a transparent culture that fostered loyalty Damien had only ever tried to buy. Rossi Thorne Legacy, the firm she had renamed to honor her partner Marcus Thorne, and her own heritage began to flourish, not with the explosive, volatile growth of Damien's era, but with a steady, formidable strength. They became a beacon on Wall Street for a different kind of success, one built on integrity. Damien, meanwhile, was learning the architecture of ruin. His world had shrunk to the 4 beige walls of a generic, soulless apartment in a part of the city he once flew over in his helicopter. The days were long and empty, punctuated by the sting of fresh humiliations. Old contacts, men who had once courted his favor, now sent his calls to voicemail. The invitations to golf at Shinnecock or to join private equity roundtables were a distant memory. He was a ghost haunting the edges of a world that had once been his kingdom. He spent hours watching financial news channels, a form of self-torture. He saw Isabella. She was a guest on Bloomberg, poised and articulate, discussing market trends with a confident ease that infuriated and fascinated him. She wasn't the quiet, deferential woman he had married. She was a force. He read the Forbes article, the one that dubbed her the architect of Wall Street, a dozen times. He studied the accompanying photo of her in her new office, a space filled with light and clean lines, a stark contrast to the dark, intimidating mahogany den he had favored. She was smiling a genuine smile he hadn't seen in years, and her hand rested protectively on her pregnant belly. Every image, every word of praise for her was another shovelful of dirt on the grave of his former life. His affair with Serafina felt like a cheap, tawdry footnote to his own destruction. She had bled him dry for her silence about the Ethelred deal, and then vanished, leaving him with just enough money to be miserable. One crisp autumn afternoon, Isabella decided to take Giovanni for a walk. The air was cool, and the leaves in Central Park were a riot of gold and crimson. As she pushed the stroller along a familiar path near the reservoir, her son sleeping soundly under a soft blanket, she saw a figure on a bench hunched over, staring at the ground. Damien. He was a spectre of the man he once was. The custom-tailored suit was replaced by a frayed jacket and worn-out jeans. He was thinner, and his once immaculate hair was unkempt. He looked lost, hollowed out by his own choices. Her first instinct was a visceral one, to turn to steer the stroller down another path and protect her son from the sorrow and failure that clung to the man on the bench. It would be easy. He hadn't even seen them. But she stopped. That was the old Isabella, the one who avoided conflict, who retreated. She was a different woman now. She was a Rossi. She was Giovanni's mother. And this broken man was her son's father. Straightening her shoulders, she pushed the stroller forward, the wheels making a soft crunching sound on the gravel path. The sound made him look up. His eyes, those same steely eyes that now looked back at her, from her son's face, widened first in shock, then in a wave of profound gut-wrenching shame. He seemed to shrink into himself, unable to meet her gaze, his eyes falling instead on the bassinet. Isabella. He breathed, his voice a hoarse whisper. He slowly, hesitantly, got to his feet. "Hello, Damien?" she said, her voice even and calm. She stopped a few feet away, a safe distance. He took a tentative step closer, his gaze fixed on the sleeping baby. Is that him?" "Yes," she said, a simple statement of fact. "This is Giovanni." A storm of emotions crossed Damien's face, all regret, a deep, aching sorrow for a life he had never known he wanted until it was irrevocably gone. "He's beautiful," he murmured, his voice cracking. "Isabella, he looks perfect." "He is," she affirmed, her hand resting on the stroller's handle. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words, with years of mistakes and months of consequences. The cheerful sounds of the park children, laughing, a distant dog barking, seemed to belong to another universe. "I saw the article. The one in Forbes," Damien said, finally desperate to fill the void. "And the quarterly reports. Their public record." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "What you've done with the company, it's masterful. You stabilized the European fund, something I always struggled with. You built a real culture. It's better, stronger than it ever was with me." It was an admission that cost his shattered ego dearly, but it was the truth. A building needs a solid foundation. "Damien," she replied, her tone more like a professor than an ex-wife. "You were focused on building higher, faster. You never cared what was underneath. I had to build something that would last. For him." She glanced down at her sleeping son. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "I know I have no right." He began, his voice raw, with a desperation that was utterly foreign to the man he used to be. He finally met her eyes, and she saw the full depth of his desolation. "I know I deserve none of your kindness, but I have to ask, Isabella, will I ever be able to see him, to know him?" Isabella looked from the broken man before her to the innocent child in the stroller. The pain he'd inflicted was a scar on her heart, a permanent part of her history. but her son's future was a clean page. Did he deserve to grow up with a father-shaped hole in his life? Or did he deserve to know the truth, however complicated revenge was an ending? This, she realized, had to be a beginning. Perhaps, she said, her voice softening just a fraction. It was not forgiveness, not yet. It was a challenge. But not like this. Not as a ghost. Go and build something, Damien. Not an empire, something small, something real. Get a job. Pay your own rent. Show that you can create something, however modest, with honesty and your own 2 hands. Show that you can respect yourself. When you can look in the mirror and not hate the man you see, when you have a life you are proud to show your son, then you can call me. Then we can talk about a beginning. It was more than he could have hoped for. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He nodded, unable to speak the sliver of hope she offered, both a lifeline and a monumental task. "Thank you," he whispered. Isabella held his gaze for a moment longer, a silent acknowledgement of the final closing of one chapter and the tentative opening of another. Then she turned her posture erect and her stride confident. She pushed the stroller deeper into the park, moving away from the shadows of the past and into the warm golden light of the autumn afternoon. She did not look back. She was Isabella Rossi, the architect of her own life, and the most magnificent structure she would ever create was the future, a future she was building one strong, steady, and deliberate step at a time. And so the story of Damien Blackwood serves as a chilling reminder. A throne built on lies is made of glass, and underestimating the person you sideline is the most dangerous gamble of all. Isabella Rossi didn't just reclaim her life. She rebuilt an empire on a foundation of integrity and strength, proving that the best revenge isn't fury, but a life lived brilliantly. She tore down a house of cards and in its place constructed a legacy of stone, not for a man who betrayed her, but for the child who represented her future. What did you think of Isabella's masterful move? Do you believe Damien deserved a second chance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and rebirth resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who loves a story of epic revenge, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more dramatic stories that prove the quietest voices can make the loudest impact. Thank you for listening.